You waited 4 whole years for another Little Nightmares game. Supermassive promised you could finally play with a friend and explore new nightmares together. And then you actually played it, and something felt off the entire time, but you just couldn't quite explain what. Today, we're comparing all 3 games to figure out what Supermassive got right and what they completely missed about this franchise. Little Nightmares 3 dropped on October 10th, 2025. Some people genuinely love it. Others, though, feel personally betrayed. I mean, there's really no middle ground, which is fascinating because usually when a game is just mediocre, everyone kind of agrees that, well, it's mediocre. But this isn't that. This is a fan base actively arguing about whether the game fundamentally understands what Little Nightmares is supposed to be. So let's establish some ground rules before we get into this. First off, I am not here to tell you that the game is trash. But I'm not here to defend it either. We're just going to be comparing the first 2 games and figuring out what changed, what worked, and what absolutely did not work for the third. Sound good? Cool. Now, before we talk about what Little Nightmares 3 is missing, we need to establish what made the original so effective. Little Nightmares 1 released back in 2017. You played as Six, a kid in a yellow raincoat trapped on a nightmarish ship called the Maw. The game was short, but every single moment was dripping with atmosphere. The janitor with his grotesquely long arms. The twin chefs preparing God knows what in the kitchen. The lady and her obsession with her appearance. I mean, these weren't just enemies, they represented something. Childhood fears twisted into adult monstrosities. Little Nightmares 2 then came out in 2021 and somehow raised the bar. You play as Mono with Six as your companion. The pale city became this suffocating nightmare of technological horror. The teacher with her extending neck. The thin man and that absolutely devastating ending. Tarsier Studios understood something crucial. Horror isn't just about jump scares. It's about atmosphere. It's about making you feel unsafe in a space, even when nothing is actively chasing you. And both games nailed this. Long stretches of nothing but ambient sounds and your own footsteps. Then sudden bursts of panic when something notices you. The pacing was deliberate. The environments told stories without dialogue. I mean, you didn't need exposition dumps because every room you walked through communicated exactly what kind of nightmare you were trapped in. And most importantly, both games made you feel alone. Even when Six was with you in the second game, she felt like an NPC designed for a single-player experience. You were still isolated, and this is what Little Nightmares was built on. So, Tarsier Studios gets acquired by Embracer Group in 2019. They finish up Little Nightmares 2 and then they announce that they're done with the franchise. Bandai Namco still owns the IP though, so they hand it off to Supermassive Games, and Supermassive decides the next evolution of Little Nightmares is co-op. And not optional co-op. The core design is built around 2 players. You've got Lo and Alone as your protagonists. Lo has a bow and arrow, Alone has a wrench. You work together to solve puzzles and escape the threats. On paper, it does sound pretty innovative. I mean, it's Little Nightmares, but you can share the terror with a friend. Except there's a problem. A pretty big one, actually. Horror and co-op don't really mix well. At least, not the kind of horror that Little Nightmares has specialized in. But we'll get to that later. For now, let's go ahead and start with the positives, because there are actually quite a few. Visually, the game looks incredible. Supermassive clearly had access to better tools and many more resources. The environments are larger, they're more detailed, and they're more varied than anything in the first 2 games. The lighting and texture work is genuinely impressive. So if you're just looking at screenshots, Little Nightmares 3 might be the best looking game in the series. The character-specific tools actually add something as well. Lo's bow lets you hit distance switches and cut ropes. Alone's wrench lets you smash through walls and break objects. This creates puzzle variety that simply didn't exist before. Some of the co-op puzzles are legitimately clever, and honestly, if you are playing with a friend, the game can be fun. You get those co-op experiences where you're both figuring out a puzzle and occasionally screaming when something goes wrong. But that begs the question, why doesn't it feel like Little Nightmares? Well, here's where we hit the first major issue. Little Nightmares 3 is not scary. Like, at all. And I don't mean it has fewer jump scares. I mean, it fundamentally lost the oppressive dread that defined the first two games. Remember how Little Nightmares 2 made you feel? The constant unease, the long, silent stretches where you're just waiting for something horrible to happen? The sound design using your own imagination against you. Little Nightmares 3 doesn't have any of that. The environments are way too big, there's far too much space. I mean, you're never trapped in claustrophobic hallways where every corner could hide something terrible. Instead, you're running through massive rooms with your co-op partner. And here's the thing. I mean, to point out the obvious, when you're with someone else, you don't feel alone.
Do you hear me? I'm not afraid anymore!
And that's the problem. The entire identity of Little Nightmares was isolation, being small and helpless in a world designed to destroy you. With co-op, you're constantly aware that another player is there. You feel capable, and capability is the opposite of horror. The pacing is just off too. Chase sequences in the previous games were intense because they were designed for one player. But in Little Nightmares 3, the chase sequence feels like they're still designed for one player, but now there's two of you. If one person lags behind, they get grabbed, but the enemy seems to pace with whoever's in front. So the person behind just kinda gets deleted, and it breaks the tension because you're not scared, you're simply annoyed. The game expects perfect synchronization, but doesn't account for human error or reaction time differences. So instead of feeling like you barely escaped, you just feel like the game has cheated you. Now, let's switch gears here and talk about the monsters. Little Nightmares 1 had the janitor, the chefs, and the lady. Little Nightmares 2 had the hunter, the teacher, the doctor, and the thin man. Every single one of these enemies was iconic. They represented something deeper than just scary thing that chases you. The janitor represented authority figures who misuse power over children. The guests represented mindless consumption. The thin man represented corruption and inevitability. Little Nightmares 3 has Monster Baby, a giant doll that stumbles around a desert city. I mean, yeah, it's a cool visual, I guess, but what does it represent? Well, nobody knows. There's the supervisor, a six-armed woman who turns into a spider. Creepy, sure, but what's the deeper meaning? Where's the symbolism? Then you've got the circus chapter with puppets and an old man. Despite this chapter being one of the better ones in the game, it's generic horror. I mean, textbook stuff. Nothing here sticks with you. And that's the difference. Tarsier understood that horror is psychological. It's about making something familiar into something wrong. Adults twisted into monsters, childhood spaces turned hostile, and Supermassive just made things that look scary. It's surface-level horror, the kind you see in every generic horror game. Nothing about these enemies will haunt you after you finish playing. And now we get to the biggest letdown. The story, or the lack thereof. Little Nightmares 1 had a simple but devastating narrative. Little Nightmares 2 gave you a time loop tragedy. Both games told complete stories with powerful endings that sparked endless fan theories and discussions. Little Nightmares 3, you travel through 4 locations. Lo has the ability to travel through mirrors, except you never stay in one place long enough to care about it. You're constantly jumping to the next area. Each location has its own enemy and aesthetic, but there's no connective tissue. No overarching narrative pulling it together. It feels like a theme park tour. Stop 1, Giant Baby. Stop 2, Spider Lady. Stop 3, Circus Nightmares. Stop 4, Snake-Armed Hypnotist. Then the ending happens. Alone disappears, Lo is left alone. Get it? Alone leaves Lo alone? Yeah, we caught that. But why should we care? You barely had any time to develop any attachments to these characters. The game introduces both protagonists at once instead of focusing on one journey. Split attention means half the emotional impact. And the ending itself raises one question. Is that it? No satisfying conclusion, no mind-bending revelation, just a vague, unsatisfying stop. So, here's where we land. Little Nightmares 3 is not a bad game. If you go in expecting a co-op puzzle platformer with creepy visuals, then you'll probably have a decent time. But if you go in expecting the next chapter of the Little Nightmares series, you're gonna be disappointed. Because it's missing everything that made the first 2 games unforgettable. Supermassive Games made a competent horror adjustment game. Tarsier Studios made nightmares. That's the difference. And honestly, for returning fans, that is gonna sting. You waited 4 years for another entry in this franchise, and what you got was a game that visually looks like Little Nightmares, but just doesn't feel like it. Let me ask you though, do you think co-op horror can ever work, or does it fundamentally contradict what makes horror effective? Drop your thoughts down in the comments below. And if you found this breakdown helpful, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss our next deep dive. And if you're debating whether to buy Little Nightmares 3, maybe watch some gameplay first. See if it's your kind of horror, or if you'd rather stick with the originals.